People who lived long ago didn't have access to the same materials or pool of knowledge that we have access to today, but that doesn't mean that they weren't smart or inventive. In fact, they were every bit as inventive as we are, in some cases, even more so. There are some fabulous examples of our ancestors' inventiveness in this video of mysterious archaeological finds. If you wanted to find your way around the Pacific Ocean from the coast of the Marshall Islands hundreds of years ago, you'd need a stick chart. These hard-to-comprehend, complex charts were used by the Marshallese to work out not only where they were in relation to other islands, but how ocean swell patterns worked. The stick charts were usually made from the midribs of coconut fronds, with each shell tied to the framework representing an island. Larger islands were represented by the junction of two sticks, while threads represent wave crests and the directions they took. No stick chart looks like any other stick chart, so it's likely that each one was unique to the person who made it and could only be understood by them. Nobody knows when the Marshallese started making stick charts because nobody bothered to document the tradition until the mid-19th century, but they remained in use until the end of the Second World War, when electronic navigation aids finally reached the Marshall Islands. They might look primitive, but they're thought to be the earliest known tools for mapping ocean swells. When and where was the world's first robot invented? Well, that depends on what you define as a robot. Robots are automatons, derived from the Greek word automatos, meaning animated. The golems of Jewish myth were said to be automatons, as were the robotic servants of Hephaestus. However, according to an ancient Taoist text called Lai Tzu, written by the Chinese philosopher Lai Yuku, King Mu of Shao saw an automaton show performed by a man named Yan Shi about 3,000 years ago. Yan Shi's automaton could sing, dance, walk, and move its head up and down. The king ordered the automaton to be taken apart and found it was made only of leather, wood, paint, and glue, with artificial hair, teeth, muscles, and bones. This would sound far-fetched if it weren't for records of King Lanling also seeing a dancing, walking robot 2,500 years ago and Daifang Ma creating mechanical birds during the same era. Some of the tales, perhaps even all of the tales, are likely to be exaggerated. But Li Yuko wasn't prone to flights of fantasy and is unlikely to have made the stories up. When you think of the kind of weapons that might be available to a modern army, rocket launchers are probably quite close to the top of your list. It might therefore surprise you to know that variations on the idea of rocket launchers have been around since the 16th century. They're a Korean invention, and the Koreans called them hwacha. The English translation of the word is close to fire chariot. The invention of the hwacha is a big part of the reason that Korea was able to repel the Japanese attempt to conquer the country in the Imjin War of the 1590s. There's some anecdotal evidence that fire chariots might have existed in Korea 100 years earlier than that, but it can't be proven. Each hwacha was basically a board full of holes on a two-wheeled cart. The holes would be lined up with the target, and arrows would be placed into them. Each arrow had a shaft full of gunpowder, which was used as a propellant. The earliest hwacha could launch 100 of these rockets at a time, but later models doubled that capacity and went even higher. They were dangerous to use because of the risk of explosion, but their deadliness made the risk worthwhile. There are many myths attached to Volvel paper machines. They're said to be able to calculate the date and time, which seems reasonable. But would you believe that they could also calculate the concept of absolute truth? The man who invented them certainly wanted people to think so. That man was Ramon Lull of Majorca, one of the most respected scientists and philosophers in Europe during the 13th and 14th centuries. In design and function, they're a little like astrolabes, but astrolabes were clockwork and made of steel. Making a functional machine like this out of paper is astonishing. Aside from being a philosopher, Lull also saw himself as a religious visionary and argued that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism should all be united as one faith, worshipping one God. To use his Volvels, the user had to align the machine with the pole star and center the crossed circles on the face of the Volvel. Using this method, it was apparently possible to determine your location, the time, and the date. At the same time, the newly oriented Volvel would also display a compelling argument for the existence of God. It's a very strange creation, and it isn't surprising that 300 years later, they were banned because people thought they were being used in dark arts rituals. You might not think there's anything exciting about our next archaeological mystery when you first look at it. To all intents and purposes, it looks like a rusty old bolt, possibly a discarded piece of machinery. Here's the twist. This bolt is 300 million years old. How is that even remotely possible? The bolt was found in the summer of 1998 at a site in Russia by researchers hunting for meteorite fragments near Moscow. It's hard to disagree with the logic of their findings in this case. The rock is 300 million years old, and the bolt is so deeply embedded in the rock that the stone has grown around it. The only conclusion that can be reached is that the bolt is also 300 million years old. That would mean it existed not only before human life on our planet, but before the time of the dinosaurs. Amazingly, this find isn't unique. Examples of screws, bolts, gears, and cogs have been found embedded in equally ancient rocks all over the world. The official scientific explanation is that the shapes are actually crinoid fossils, but surely that can't be possible in every single case. Our next discovery isn't just one discovery from the ancient world, but several. It's the curious suggestion made by respected historical figures like Petronius and Pliny the Elder that the ancient Romans were capable of producing almost indestructible forms of flexible glass. We know that the Romans could make glass, but around the time of Tiberius Caesar, descriptions of unbreakable glass began to appear in ancient Roman texts. The emperor allegedly wasn't a fan of the material, though. In fact, it's said that he himself put an end to the practice of making it because he was afraid the new glass would become a more valuable material than gold and wreak havoc on the Roman economy. On the surface, the idea of unbreakable glass might sound too fantastical to be true, but there's reason to believe that the stories might be accurate. The Romans were aware of and had access to the boric acid that came from the steam vents in the Tuscan Maremma outside Rome. If that substance were added to a standard glass mixture, it would result in a type of glass that would be extremely difficult to shatter. We're not sure it would have been flexible, but it would certainly have been tough. Humans have always enjoyed wearing jewelry. Rings are among the most common discoveries made at ancient archaeological sites, and the oldest rings ever discovered were made over 10,000 years ago. This ring isn't quite that old, but it's very unique and ingeniously evil. It's a 14th century Bulgarian ring discovered in an old medieval fortress in Cape Kalykra in 2012. At the center of the ring is a tiny hole, which would normally be used to affix a ring stone. There's no stone in this ring, though. Instead, there's a tiny cavity to hold a few drops of deadly poison. The contents of the ring could be tipped into an enemy's food or drink without their knowledge. As the fortress was the home of the region's aristocracy during the medieval era, it's likely that it was used in politically motivated murders. There was a spate of them in the 14th century, and clever weapons like this one might have had something to do with it. It's more the sort of gadget you expect James Bond to be carrying around with him than a 14th century Bulgarian assassin, and yet here it is. Next up, we have a staggeringly beautiful well, a near miracle of 16th century architecture and design. This is Pozzo di San Patrizio in Orvieto, Italy. As if these photos inside it weren't dramatic enough, the whole thing is right on the edge of a cliff. The well was built during the early 1500s by order of Pope Clement VIII. He was hiding out in the city at the time as Rome was under attack, and he knew that Orvieto would quickly run out of water in the event of a siege. His solution was this 170-foot-deep well, complete with 70 windows and dual staircases, specifically designed to ensure that pack animals could run up and down the well without colliding. It was a monumental task, and took a full decade to complete, by which point Pope Clement was dead anyway. Despite its breathtaking beauty and the fact that it functions perfectly as a well, it was declared obsolete from the moment it was finished, and it's barely been used. The upside of that is that it's still in excellent condition. At least the people of Orvieto know they'll be able to drink if a siege ever comes along. King Tutankhamun might not have been the most significant ruler of ancient Egypt, but he's one we know a lot about, thanks to the discovery of his undiscovered tomb by Howard Carter during the 1920s. We're still finding out new information about him now, including the fact that he might have spent his nights sleeping on the world's first fold-out camping bed. They're 10 a penny at places like IKEA nowadays, but it must have seemed like a technological marvel 3,300 years ago. There were 5 beds inside his tomb when it was opened, but this one wasn't like the others. It's smaller, sits lower to the ground, and is made of 3 separate moving pieces that could be folded away into a Z shape. Quite why the most important man in Egypt would have needed this basic convenience is unknown. He was very young when he passed away, though, so perhaps he still enjoyed inviting his friends around for sleepovers. A few 2-fold beds have been found in Egyptian tombs before, but King Tut's 3-fold bed is the only one of its kind to be discovered so far. Although the religions of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism differ from each other, they share some key beliefs. One of them is that the Vajra is the chosen weapon of the gods. You'll find mentions of Vajra going back as far as the Rig Veda, the first part of the 4 known Vedas. From an etymological point of view, there are 2 ways we can understand the word Vajra, both of which come from Sanskrit. The first is as lightning, and the second is as diamond. In both instances, it's thought the intention of the word is to represent the weapon as an irresistible force. According to mythology, Indra was told directly by Vishnu that a weapon made from the bones of the Hindu sage Daidichi would be capable of destroying the serpent demon known as Vritra. The weapon in question was created by the divine artisan Tvashtar and proved to be successful. Indian traditions hold the Vajra as the most powerful weapon in the universe. That's a bold claim for a weapon that's basically a club with a ribbed head, but there's no shortage of people who believe in it. What historians know about the ancient Hopewell culture of North America could be written on the back of a cigarette packet, but archaeologists are hopeful that the discovery of some drilled bear teeth in Kansas in March 2022 might help them to shed new light on this mysterious culture. The Hopewell culture spread across the east of North America between the 1st and 5th centuries, but left very little behind in terms of artifacts or cultural relics to help modern-day experts to get to know them. We know that they valued copper, seashells, and mica, but these drilled canine teeth are a whole new kind of Hopewell discovery. They belonged to a black bear, and as they were found in Kansas, they placed the Hopewell culture significantly further west than we tend to imagine they traveled. It's likely that the teeth were drilled so they could be strung together into a necklace, or perhaps even a belt, but we have no way of knowing for sure. The boundaries of the Hopewell interaction sphere are hazy, and discoveries like this one only serve to make them hazier. What can you tell about an ancient culture by looking at their tools? In the case of the tiny tools of the ancient Indonesians, the answer to that question is quite a lot. These stone and bone artifacts are known as point tools and were developed on the island of Sulawesi by the Tolian people. Based on what we think we know about them, they first appeared on the island as hunter-gatherers roughly 8,000 years ago. The tools they made are unlike any other tools developed elsewhere in Indonesia, or in fact, the rest of the world. Just under 1,800 examples of the tools have been identified and collected by archaeologists so far, with more likely to be found in the future. It's likely that they were used for hunting fish, although a variant of the tool known as Maros points might have been mounted on shafts and used as arrowheads. It was once thought that the Tolians were connected to the Aborigines of Australia, but such is the uniqueness of their tools that we now believe them to be a separate culture. Having concluded that the Tolians didn't come from Australia, the experts now have to come up with a new theory about their origins. That might take a while. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!